guys, I'm here today to talk about the 10 lowest rated books on my TBR. So, I have a shelf on Goodreads where I've shelved all 100 of my unread books that I actually own. And I sorted the shelf by average rating, and these are the books that have the lowest ratings. And I mean the lowest star ratings rather than like the lowest amount of ratings overall. So I find this sort of thing really interesting. I also had a look at the lowest rated books that I've read that I kept, so I liked enough to keep them. And what I noticed about that selection is they tend to be quite odd books, tend to be way more likely to be like magical realism, bizarre fiction. And I think that's because those sort of books, a lot of people rate low, not because they're bad books, but because they're not to that person's taste, because they're much more niche. And I think quite a few of the books I have on this stack also fit that criteria. So I am quite snobbish to do with Goodreads ratings. I look up every single book's ratings on Goodreads before I buy it, whether I'm sent a review copy, whether I buy it online or whether I buy it in person in a shop. I always check Goodreads ratings and I trust quite heavily in them. And what I mean by that is I think that unless a book is a bit more bizarre, if it's a general type of book, a general literary fiction, or even genre fiction to a degree, people tend to read books they think they'll be interested in, and so if the rating is low, then it's probably a reflection that the book isn't great. Like I said, I think there's exceptions to be made for books that are a bit odder because people just give it a chance and then it doesn't work out for them. So I do trust Goodreads, and because of that, quite a few of these books are actually sitting at around 3.5 stars on Goodreads, and they're some of the lowest rated books I own, which I think shows quite how picky I am about it. So yeah, that's my little intro. I'd love to know your thoughts about what you think about Goodreads ratings. Like, I'm sure some of you don't even check them at all and just buy the books. So yeah, do you just take a chance and literally just go on the blurb and reading a couple of pages? I'd be intrigued to know. So the first book is Our Hearts Will Burn Us Down by Valente. This has 3.08 on Goodreads. The reason I have this is because I read her short story collection By Light We Knew Our Names, and it is glorious. Absolutely loved it. It is a short story collection that focuses on magical realism and like folklore and fables, and it is very beautifully written, really lyrical, really descriptive. So when I heard she had this debut novel coming out a few years ago, I snapped myself up a copy. I didn't buy it brand new because it's only been published in the US and it was very expensive, and I was dubious because whilst I loved her short story collection, this wasn't getting great reviews. So I bought it second hand. They actually sent me an advanced reader's copy, which is a bit naughty, but you know, one of those things. So I picked it up when it arrived and I read about 30 pages. I thought it was beautifully written, but then I never carried on. And I always get put off picking it up since then because of how low the ratings are. It's almost like I want to like leave it sitting there on my shelves as an Valente book that I could possibly still love, and I'm scared to read it in case I don't, and then like that's sad because I really loved her short story collection. It's a really odd reason for not reading a book. So if you haven't heard, the premise of this one is that it is set in a small suburb and there is a high school shooting, and following the high school shooting, lots of people's houses in this suburb start to be set alight. So people are like still reeling from the incident and they're trying to recover, and they don't know who is setting these fires and why, and if it's linked to the shooting. And this is told from a chorus of voices of a friendship group, boys and girls. Of what I read, it was stunning, very lyrical, but the reviews I've read of people not enjoying it say that whilst it's beautifully written, nothing really happens, it gets quite confused and doesn't really go anywhere. So I'd love to know if you've read this one. I'm definitely still keeping it. I'm very intrigued by this author. She's just had a new book come out last year, again only published in the US as far as I know. And I think that one's getting better ratings, but I'm not letting myself buy it until I've read the other book of hers I own, because I try and enforce that rule as much as possible. So there is that one. The next one has a rating of 3.34, so a little bit higher, and that is Woman Number 17 by Edan Lepucki. So I picked this one up because I heard this being discussed on a podcast called So Many Damn Books, and it's where an author comes on and they talk to the author about their new book, and then the author brings up another book they've really enjoyed recently and they chat about it. And the author who was on the podcast, whose name I can't remember now, but I will put here somewhere, she spoke about this book and I really liked the sound of it, and so I picked it up, obviously. And actually, I read the first sort of 10-20 pages of this and I was really torn because part of me was really drawn in but part of me could also sense that maybe it would have something about it that would bother me. So the premise of this is that it's set in the Hollywood Hills, and quite a wealthy woman is separated from her husband. She needs help with her toddler son, but also her older son, who I believe has recently stopped talking. She hires this babysitter called S, and S becomes very involved with the children, I think particularly with the older son, and builds quite a close relationship with him that his mother can't seem to get involved in. And that's all I know. So I think this is quite eerie and unsettling. It opens with this babysitter arriving and being quite mysterious and aloof, and it's just all a bit odd. So this sounds really great, but some of the reviews are awful, and some people really don't like it and say that it's very surface level and quite shallow, and the characters are really unlikable, which doesn't tend to bother me. So I've been a bit scared off of this one, and also one of the reasons why I struggle to find the right moment to pick this one up is because it is obviously set, like I said, in Hollywood. I think it's set during a summer, it's really hot. I don't tend to love reading books that are set in hot locations, so I never find the right time to pick it up, but I did buy it and I would like to read it. So again, if you've read this one, let me know what you thought of it. This next one has a rating of 3.41, and that is Sunshine's Day by Gerard. This is an essay collection. You've probably heard me talk about this a couple of times. I actually was reading this in December, and I read the first 2 essays. Yeah, the first 2. So I've read the first 2 essays twice, and at both points I stopped, and I did that a year apart. The first essay, BFF, I absolutely bloody love. I think it's phenomenal. I think it's a beautiful essay. I love it. It's about the toxic friendship she had with this woman and how they're really distant now, and her reminiscing on the hurtful and also loving things they did for one another, and I thought it was just pure poetry. The next essay is called Mother, Father, God, and the parts where she talks about her mother and her father are brilliant, but the parts where she talks about the way the church that her parents are part of developed is boring, really dry. She doesn't do history well, she doesn't draw you in, there's too many names, there's too many dates, she doesn't give any sort of context that makes you care. So yeah, I think she's very good at personal essays, but whenever she draws in trying to teach you something that isn't related to herself, she doesn't do it well. So I'm now very dubious about carrying on. I think a lot of the reasons this has low ratings is because this was sold as an essay collection about Florida, and in particular about Florida's fauna, and it isn't really. And so I think this one may be an unfair rating, more based on the publishers and how they marketed the book. So yeah, I need to carry on and just see how I feel, and maybe this will be one where I will just skip and only read the essays I really love, which I don't like doing. I either like giving up on a book or finishing it, but I feel like if I completely give up, I could be missing out on some beautiful essays like BFF, so yeah, there's that one. This next one also has a rating of 3.41, and it is Slip of a Fish by Amy Arnold. I've never heard anyone talk about this, so I don't really know the reasons for its sort of lowish rating. So this is published by And Other Stories. They publish a lot of translated works, but they also publish a lot of British books that are set in northern locations about sort of working class or rural families, which I love. So I think they're a really great publisher and definitely one worth checking out. So this won the Northern Book Prize in 2018, which is, I believe, a prize that they run. I mean, you apply, and when you win, you get your book published by them. And my guess for the reason this has quite low ratings is because it's one of those odd books that I think only a certain type of reader would enjoy. This is about a mother, and she lives with her 7-year-old son. It says, bemused by everyday life, she has a rich and singular interior world. Over the course of a relentlessly hot summer, Charlie begins to pull away, and in a desperate attempt to reconnect with her daughter, apologies, daughter not son, Ash does something unforgivable. It says this is a joyously artful and quietly devastating portrait of motherhood, loss and love in all its kaleidoscopic complexity. I think that sounds beautiful. I've read the first few pages of this, and it's very playful with language. The main character talks a lot about language and what it means to her and tries to sort of make up words, and I think that could put a lot of people off because it's not your standard type of narration. So yeah, this sounds like a book I could really love. I have no reason why this has sat on my shelf for a year unread, because it sounds like something that I could adore. So let me know if you read this one, because I've never discussed it with anyone. The next one has a rating of 3.47, and I bought this book solely based on the cover, which is quite embarrassing and something I rarely do. This is The Cold Is in Her Bones by Peternelle van Arsedale. I probably said that wrong, I'm really sorry. So it's not just like I saw it in a shop and thought, oh, I love that cover, I'm going to buy it, because I don't tend to do that. Actually, I follow this artist on Instagram. She's called Jessica Rue, and her art is absolutely beautiful. I really love it, and it's like hard for me to get any of it because I'd have to pay massive shipping costs to get it over here. But I think her art is stunning, and it's the sort of art I love. And so when I heard that she had illustrated this book cover, I was really pleased for her, because, you know, she's getting more work outside of sort of doing things for herself and selling. She does lots of labels on beer bottles, which are beautiful. She's getting more book covers, and so I thought that was amazing. And it was one of those books, I had a little look into it and I thought, oh, that sounds quite intriguing. And so when I saw it for like £2 in a second-hand bookshop, I thought, I'm going to pick it up because it's beautiful and I really like her artwork. So yeah. So this is a YA fantasy book, and I think this is quite bizarre. It's sort of like a fairy tale. It's about a girl called Mila who is forbidden to leave her family's farm, I think. But then a bright-eyed girl called Iris comes to stay, who has a secret. And Iris is from a village where a demon possesses the girls. And the demon is now following Iris. So it follows these two girls as they try and deal with the demon. So yeah, this has, like I said, for a YA, very low ratings. 3.47 for a YA book is low. I'm hoping that's because it's quite lyrical and a bit odd and just not traditional in what like YA fantasy readers enjoy, because yeah, I like the description, I love the cover, and it sounds like it could be a really interesting read. So let me know if you've picked this one up. The next one has a rating of 3.53, and that is How It Was by Janet Ellis. Now this is quite interesting in that this falls out of the remit of most of the others. This isn't an odd sounding book, this is a fairly typical sounding literary fiction, so the fact that this doesn't have great ratings may mean it's just not great. Like I said, I'm much more forgiving of low ratings on books that are a bit more bizarre. The premise of this is that it's set in the 70s in suburban England, and we follow a mother who is sort of really disappointed by her life. She feels like the 60s really passed her by in the suburbs and her life is still really traditional and old-fashioned and constrained. And one day she opens her daughter's diary and she reads it, and she feels filled with rage at the fact that her daughter seems to be getting to live the life she wished she had. So she does something of which she can't really take back, and it says the repercussions are awful, and you follow that. This is supposed to be quite dark and unsettling. I read The Butcher's Hook by this author and really enjoyed it. I know that was really celebrated, and again that was quite dark and unsettling and unexpected, but that got way better ratings than this one. I'm really intrigued by it. I think the premise sounds great. I don't think there's enough books set in like suburban England, particularly in the 60s and 70s. I really like the premise of her reading her daughter's diary and like this unknowable dark thing. So yeah, I haven't really read the reviews to see why people aren't giving this higher ratings, but I really like the sound of it, and it's certainly one I have on my list to pick up soon. The next one with a rating of 3.58 is a poetry collection, and I think the only unread poetry collection I own, and that is Witch by Rebecca Tamas, and the lovely Jen bought me this one. So I was really happy to get this. I don't read poetry very much at all, but I love witches and I always want to know more about them, and I, you know, love the sound of this one. I think some of these are supposed to be quite descriptive, and maybe that's put people off. I think some people think that the stories are a bit vulgar. Doesn't bother me at all. Sorry, poems, not stories. That doesn't bother me at all, so I'm very much intrigued by this one. I do wonder whether some of these poems, I think some of them deal with like real historical events, and maybe if you read this without the context you just be lost and not really know what the poem is about, which I get. So I guess that could have led to people giving it lower ratings, but you will see a book I'm going to show later on. I'm planning to read those as a pair, so there's that. Another book with 3.58, and the most well-known book on this stack, and probably one of the most well-known books I own, is The Vegetarian by Han Kang, translated by Deborah Smith. I don't have much to say about this one other than I was surprised by the fact that it only has 3.58. So I know that loads of people didn't really enjoy this book, but I feel like I heard so many people say how much they absolutely loved it that I'm surprised that the sort of average rating isn't a bit higher than that. So I think this sounds like a sort of book I could really enjoy. Again, this sounds like an odder book, so some people are just not going to enjoy that. So it makes sense, but I just feel like I heard way more positive reviews than I did negative. But I'm also aware that sometimes people who are as involved in booktube as I am think that the booktube consensus is the consensus of all readers, and of course it isn't. So sometimes I have to remember that. So So there's that one. And the next one has a rating of 3.57, and it's the one that I would like to try and read with the poetry collection, and it is The Witch, A History of Fear from Ancient Times to the Present by Ronald Dutton. So I want to read this first and the poetry collection after, because I'm hoping then maybe some of those poems that I wouldn't have the context for or the historical knowledge I will have from reading this. Now, I am a bit nervous about the fact that this got 3.57 because I think that's pretty poor for a historical non-fiction book. I think the reasons for those ratings is a lot of people said the book's quite dry, but I was trying to find a book about the history of witches that wasn't just focused on Salem witch trials. And I think there's a lot of sort of coffee table type books. I don't really like reading coffee table type books. And then there's a lot of books about the Salem witch trials, and it's really hard to find books that are in between that. And this seemed to fit that bill. It was exactly what I wanted, but it's just getting quite low rating, so that's a bit of a shame. I think I could really enjoy this, but I'm very dubious because that is not a great rating for this type of book. So please let me know if you've read it, and if you thought it was really dry, and if you have any recommendations for like how it's best to experience it, because I'd like to hear. This next one has a rating of 3.58, and I picked this up in Forbidden Planet, and I didn't look into it loads. I looked on Goodreads, saw that it had that rating, thought that's okay, and just really liked the sound of the book. And that is The Amateurs by Liz Harmer. I don't read enough books like this because I used to really enjoy them, and I used to buy loads of them, and I haven't so much in recent years. So this is this is set in the future, and this is I guess like sci-fi literary fiction. And it says that there is a tech system called the Port, and it says this irresistible space time travel device is mysteriously powered by nostalgia and longing. Step inside a port and find yourself transported any place your heart desires, real or imagined. Earth's population plummets when many who pass through its portal don't come back, either unwilling or unable to return. So yeah, it says this is about technology meeting desire, and there's like romance and rapture. So I have no idea like what characters you're going to follow, because that description just sort of sets up the world and the technology of the world. But I thought that sounded like a really cool idea to have a machine that's powered by nostalgia, because I think nostalgia is such a strong emotion. So I thought this sounded really interesting. Again, I don't know anyone who's read it, so if you have read it, I'd love to know your thoughts. So those are my like top 10, I guess bottom 10 books that have the lowest rating on my to be read pile. Let me know if you've read any of these, and also let me know what sort of ratings you tend to allow to pick up, or whether you just don't care at all and you just pick up whatever the hell you fancy. I'd be intrigued to know. And also, if you think there's a reason why certain books get lower ratings other than just the fact that they're not very good. Like I said, I think a big part of it is when they're sort of weirder books and people just aren't into that amount of weirdness. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!